tonight, a day of sorrow and solidarity, marking a grim milestone of war in Ukraine. Leaders make a new security pledge on the second anniversary of Russia's invasion.
Your fight is our fight.
The heartfelt show of support across Canada and around the world.
It's a day of immense grief and remembrance.
An all but eradicated disease makes a global comeback.
This is probably the most transmissible infection on the planet.
The new numbers and the public health warning ahead of spring travel season. Plus, making recordings in record time.
Hearing it back just made it that more special.
The challenge to create sweet sounds during the most snowy time of the year.
CTV National News with Heather Butts.
Good evening. As Russia's invasion of Ukraine now enters its third year, world leaders are again pledging their support to the war-torn country. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made a surprise visit to Ukraine today, joining President Volodymyr Zelensky and other allies for a wreath-laying ceremony. Canada is promising additional money for the military, but also to help repair roads and pay for medical staff. In the last 2 years, the conflict has killed thousands of civilians and destroyed entire towns. Before and after images reveal the scale of devastation, like this key eastern city of Advika. A sign of what may lie ahead as Ukraine fights off a surging Russia. On the solemn anniversary, our coverage begins in Kyiv with CTV's Heather Wright.
On this day 2 years ago, Hostomel Airport became the scene of one of the most intense battles of the war's opening days. Russia believed if they could take this airport on the outskirts of Kyiv, they could quickly march into the capital. But Ukraine fought fiercely, changing the trajectory of this war. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau began his surprise visit to Ukraine at the airport today, joining Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and leaders from Italy, Belgium, and the European Commission.
Your fight is our fight.
They held a moment of silence on the tarmac, and Zelensky handed out medals to Ukrainian soldiers, honoring them for acts of bravery.
Burnt-out airplanes dot the runway here at Hostomel Airport. Today, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russian fear first was destroyed here as he vowed to continue fighting this war, thanking his allies for their ongoing support.
But as that fight drags on, supplies are running low. More aid was announced today, with Canada pledging roughly $3 billion in funding, including $320 million in new military spending. But how quickly these promises will turn into actual supplies is unclear. Ukraine is still waiting on delivery of Canadian drones, and NASAMS, a surface-to-air missile defense system Canada purchased for Ukraine from the United States, still has no delivery date.
We will always be very quick to send whatever we can as quickly as we can.
These delays are not unique to Canada. It's a challenge many other allies are struggling with. But how quickly supplies get into the hands of soldiers can often mean the difference between life and death, between holding a city or losing it.
We all understand that the military support that we receive sometimes comes later than needed. But we also have to be very grateful to our partners that we are not abandoned.
Most of the money announced by Canada today will come in the form of loans, money to help keep the Ukrainian economy afloat as it enters its third year of war. Heather.
CTV's Heather Wright in Kyiv tonight. Thank you. Neighboring Poland has received the highest number of refugees fleeing Vladimir Putin's war, but tensions are now rising in that country as the conflict drags on. CTV's Judy Trin reports from Warsaw.
Hundreds of displaced Ukrainians gather in front of the Polish parliament to protest against Russia's war in Ukraine. Among them, Victoria Horenishin. Since the conflict began, 2 of her friends have died in combat, and she constantly fears for the safety of her family in Kherson.
Every day, I don't know what was happened last night.
Down the street, rows of crosses line the gates of the Russian embassy. The makeshift memorial is too small. Its span does not capture the full number of Ukrainian casualties. The United Nations estimates more than 10,000 civilians have been killed and nearly 20,000 injured.
The Russia is murder people who love living in peace.
Since the invasion, more than 1 million Ukrainians have sought refuge in Poland, including 15% here in Warsaw. But there are cracks showing in support. Earlier this week, Polish farmers set up blockades on freight lines, dumping grain on tracks and blocking traffic at the Ukraine border, all to protest imports of Ukrainian agricultural products that are pushing down prices. But Poland's prime minister says the country's support for Ukraine's fight against Vladimir Putin remains strong. Donald Tusk says there's a 100% guarantee that military aid, equipment, and medicine will reach the Ukrainian side without any delays. Canada's ambassador in the region says Poland's actions are impacted by its experience in the Second World War, when the country was invaded first by the Nazis, then by the Soviet Union.
By virtue of history and geography, this is a country that feels that Ukraine is right on the other side. It's on its doorstep.
Still, Poland has fallen short of a request by the European Union to extend temporary visas for Ukrainians for another year. Instead, the Polish government has approved a 6-month extension for refugees. Judy Trin, CTV News, Warsaw.
The anniversary of the war prompted a call to action today in communities across Canada and around the world. CTV's Tony Grace now on a global effort to keep the conflict in the spotlight.
A sea of faces and flags, a mix of solidarity and sadness.
Every bomb that hits Ukraine, or especially Odessa, where my mom resides, or like front lines, it puts me in terror.
This rally in Toronto, one of dozens across Canada, hundreds around the world, marking 2 years since Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
To be still here 2 years later fighting for their national statehood, it's unbelievable.
In the crowd, some of the almost 300,000 Ukrainians who've come to Canada since the war began, worried about family back home.
It's my husband, it's my family, it's my father, it's my grandmother there. I think about this every day.
They called for peace and for political action.
Give us the grace and the strength and the stamina to do more than we have.
The West has just got to give them enough arms to end it. Not to survive, but just end the darn thing.
Their refrain ringing out from the steps of Parliament Hill to City Hall in Moncton, New Brunswick, to a church service in Winnipeg, honoring the war's youngest casualties.
It's filled to capacity, and a major focus is on the children.
Among the many messages and stories, a common thread, a plea for Canadians and people around the world not to forget about the conflict, which shows no signs of ending, or the people in their own communities who in one way or another may find themselves caught up in it.
To support them and help them with the trauma that they faced. And, we can't get tired and we can't give up on supporting the people of Ukraine in this fight.
If Russia stops fighting today, the war just ends. If Ukraine stops fighting, they get annihilated. Ukraine ends.
What won't end now, they say, is their call for the world to listen. Tony Grace, CTV News, Toronto.
The world has been watching the Kremlin's response to the death of its fiercest critic, Alexei Navalny. Today, the Prime Minister unleashed on President Putin, accusing him of an execution.
He's actually a coward. To execute one's political opponents, to quash dissent by using police and military, to make sure there is no opposition, is the mark of a weakling.
Navalny died while serving a 19-year prison sentence in the Arctic Circle. A spokesperson for the 47-year-old says his body has now been released to his mother, but it's still unclear if authorities will interfere with his funeral. The United States and Britain carried out more airstrikes on Houthi rebels in Yemen today with support from Canada. Explosions and smoke could be seen in the capital. U.S. officials say fighter jets launched strikes on 18 targets hitting weapon and missile storage facilities, aerial systems, and a helicopter. The strikes are in response to a sharp increase in attacks carried out by the militia group on commercial ships in the Red Sea. Donald Trump has claimed victory in the South Carolina primary, defeating the state's former governor, Nikki Haley.
I have never seen the Republican Party so unified as it is right now.
The win propels Trump further towards the Republican Party's presidential nomination. But addressing supporters in Charleston, Haley vowed to continue her fight, saying she'll head to Michigan tomorrow ahead of Super Tuesday. A former Toronto Argonauts strength and conditioning coach is suing the CFL team and star quarterback Chad Kelly for wrongful dismissal. TSN correspondent Rick Westhead has been investigating this story and joins us now. Rick, walk us through what you're learning.
Well, this was a lawsuit that was filed in Ontario Superior Court this week. It's new, and the allegations are disturbing. A former strength and conditioning coach who's worked with the Toronto Argonauts since 2018 alleged that for the better part of 2 seasons that Chad Kelly made romantic advances towards her, and that repeatedly she told him that she wasn't interested, and that when it finally came to a head and she said to stop contacting her unless it was for work purposes, that the harassment escalated. When she took this to the Toronto Argonauts officials, she says that she was told that she'd opened a can of worms that she didn't need to open. Pretty disturbing allegations. Important to remember that Chad Kelly and the Toronto Argonauts, neither one of them have responded with a statement of defense, and the allegations, of course, have not yet been tested in court.
So, Rick, what is the league then saying about this?
Well, the league's also investigating. This is a big deal because Chad Kelly is one of the highest profile players in the Canadian Football League. He's the reigning most outstanding player in the league. He's also the richest paid player. He just signed a contract for 3 years worth $1.8 million. So he's making more money than any other football player in the CFL. We haven't heard details about what kind of morals clauses the Toronto Argonauts have with their players and whether that might be a way to, end his contract prematurely if the team investigates and finds that, in fact, that something inappropriate did happen. But again, let's remember the allegations haven't been proven, and we still don't have statements of defense from the team or from Kelly himself.
TSN correspondent Rick Westhead. Thank you, Rick. The announcement this week from Lynx Air that it was shutting down has Canada gaining a global reputation as an airline graveyard, with low-cost transit companies struggling to exist here. CTV's Kamal Karmali has more.
When Lynx Air announced its arrival,
and so we're here ready to take up the opportunity.
There was nothing but optimism. But now, just over 2 years later,
we're ready to board, and then they canceled the flight on us.
Frustration. Lynx Air shutting down due to financial pressures, adding to the long list of low-budget airlines to cease operations in Canada.
To some degree, Canada is a bit of an airline graveyard because we see the sheer numbers.
Lynx joins Swoop, which was taken over by WestJet last year. Add that to CanJet, JetSco, Zoom, and Zip that have gone under in the last 2 decades, leaving limited low-cost carrier options in Canada. With Flair Airlines in financial hot water, owing millions in unpaid taxes.
In Canada, we have a different business model in that we have a user pay model. The industry, the airports are going to be funded by air travelers.
Tickets in Canada include an airport improvement fee, security fee, provincial taxes, landing and terminal, and air navigation fees before the airline can start making any money for itself.
About 35% of the average Canadian airline ticket goes to these fees and charges.
Aviation business experts say the government needs to step up by not putting the financial burden solely on travelers.
In some countries, governments help pay for airports, and they pay for it, and it's part of the national government's role. It's not here in Canada.
Analysts now waiting to see how WestJet and Air Canada respond.
Whenever we lose a discount carrier, I'll say this much: prices do not get cheaper.
And although Air Canada did not respond to our request for a statement, WestJet said it'll continue to provide, quote, ultra-affordable fares. Heather.
All right, thanks, Kamal. Coming up, concerns over potential outbreaks.
It has a knack for finding unvaccinated or under-vaccinated individuals.
Doctors urging Canadians to shield themselves from measles. Plus, aspiring musicians take inspiration from an international challenge. The country's top doctor is urging Canadians to check your immunization records, warning of the spread of measles ahead of the March break travel season. The number of outbreaks is growing globally, and with cases already in Canada, doctors want people to be protected. CTV's Jeremy Charon reports.
Getting the shot is the simple solution, experts say.
It's a completely preventable infection, right? The vaccine, 2 doses of the vaccine, is over 97% effective.
With 6 cases in Ontario already this year, the Public Health Agency of Canada issuing a statement about the risk of measles, pointing to the global increase in infections and drop in immunization uptake. Recent stats show nearly 92% of 2-year-olds have received at least 1 dose, but only about 79% of 7-year-olds have both shots. The vaccine is usually given at 12 months and then between 4 and 6 years.
This is probably the most transmissible infection on the planet. It is very readily transmitted through the air, and it has a knack for finding unvaccinated or under-vaccinated individuals. There's morbidity and mortality associated with this, and again, it's all preventable.
Some doctors believe persistent pandemic vaccine hesitancy might be part of the problem.
When we look at the 2 vaccines, it's extremely different, and I think there was some hesitancy that developed over the course of the pandemic because of the lack of trust. And I think now we're at a stage where we have to regain that trust.
A global increase in cases has Canada's health agency raising concerns about spring travel season. This infectious diseases expert warns, since the 2nd dose for the measles vaccine was only added in 1996 in Canada.
A lot of people out there in Canada who think they're fully vaccinated, who want to be fully vaccinated, but who might not be fully vaccinated. And it's especially important for those individuals to check their vaccine cards.
Earlier this week, Ontario's Chief Medical Officer of Health sent out his own warning to public health units in this province, cautioning March break travel could lead to potential outbreaks. Heather?
Jeremy, thank you. Still to come on the show. Inflation-weary Canadians and the hunger for lower prices at the grocery store. Canadian families constantly feeling pinched in the grocery aisles appear to be changing their spending habits. Some are now switching stores to score better deals, and grocery giants are struggling to win back their trust. CTV's Adrian Gabriel reports.
The high costs of groceries aren't just taking a bite out of the bank accounts of Canadians.
Oh, God, tell me about it.
It's also devouring any hope that prices may decrease. A new Leger survey has found that 64% of Canadians think that the inflation rate in grocery stores is getting worse.
Which probably means that 64% of Canadians don't believe in Statistics Canada's data.
The fact is, food inflation is down from its peak of 11.4% in January of 2023 to 3.4% in January of this year.
Things are actually getting better, but perhaps not fast enough for most Canadians.
You buy less or you go elsewhere. You go to cheaper stores like No Frills or Walmart.
And more people are doing just that. A separate survey by Dalhousie's Agri-Food Analytics Lab found that almost 2/3 of Canadians have swapped stores in the last year in search of better deals. At least one expert believes the truth behind the high prices on the shelves lies in the middle of the supply chain.
Are grocers to blame for gouging consumers? Not really. But are grocers gouging someone? Yes, they are, particularly Loblaws and Walmart, and they're gouging their suppliers.
This all comes as Loblaw shared its fourth quarter earnings this week, which increased 3.7% or $524 million from the same period last year.
It's impacting behavior, and it's impacting how people see the food industry. And I do think that the food industry has a bit of a PR problem.
While some have turned their nose at the high cost of their kitchen staples, others say they're taking it all in stride.
I mean, our parents went through a depression, and they survived, and they're stronger for it.
We can get through this.
Yeah, we can get through this.
Canadians can circle the month of May on their calendar for the next time they'll feel a squeeze at the grocery store. That's when large grocers increase the fees for suppliers, who in turn spike the cost for their products. Adrian Gobriel, CTV News, Toronto.
After the break, striking a chord. A global challenge hits a high note in Newfoundland and Labrador. We leave you tonight with a worldwide music challenge that has found a home in Newfoundland and Labrador. It gives artists just 1 month to create a whole album. Hundreds of people are playing their favorite tunes in the challenge that has helped launch careers. CTV's Garrett Berry explains.
With just a few days left, the countdown is on for Lauren Smee and her students to finish their record.
So students walk in and they see the recording equipment and they're like, what's that? Oh, could I do that?
It just made it something bigger, I guess. Like hearing it back just made it that more special.
They are one of 786 groups who've signed up for this year's RPM record-making challenge. 108 of those submissions will come from Newfoundland and Labrador.
There's something about the RPM that makes people come back to it. Like they're gonna get addicted to it in a way.
The challenge started in a New Hampshire alternative newspaper, but was embraced in this province. Eventually, headquarters moved here. It's not a competition. There's no awards given out for the best tracks, only a listening party at the end.
It's about people having the same kind of experience. Like everybody is in the same boat, no matter their level of experience, their age, whatever genre it is. Like, it's for them.
The challenge has helped some local musicians gain their footing. In 2021, guitarist, singer, and songwriter Valmy put a whole recording together for the first time.
I was intimidated by it, but really inspired by watching other people do it. And then the next year that it came around, I was sort of okay, I'll give it a try.
She did it twice more, and last fall released an official debut album. Now she's focused on touring in Atlantic Canada.
I think it was a huge catalyst for me to get over the hump of actually recording.
The challenge happens every February. It's no coincidence that's one of the snowiest, darkest months in Newfoundland and Labrador. A bit of creative spark in a dreary season, be that folk-inspired songwriting or classical violin improv. Garrett Berry, CTV News, St. John's.
That's our show for this Saturday night. I'm Heather Butts. For all of us at CTV National News, thank you for watching. Good night, and I'll see you again tomorrow.